Welcome to Paranormal or Reality. On today's video, we explore few haunted houses, where the residents still resided even in the afterlife. Then we are off to investigate a haunted hotel in New Orleans. Now make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Let's begin. I still get chills thinking about this one. It's not my story, but the fact that my uncle said this happened floored me. He is the last person in my family I'd expect to hear this, because he's a no-nonsense kind of guy. Paranormal experiences were the last subject I'd ever think would come from him. My cousin relayed this story to me, and I followed up with him to verify everything. This was a long time ago, somewhere around the 70s, so some details were fuzzy. So, my uncle had a married friend that he hung out with on occasion, and they usually drank beers, watched football, your usual guy time kind of stuff. So one day he's over and watching a football game. The friend's wife is in the kitchen and occasionally making small talk with him. His friend is off somewhere outside or somewhere away from the events that played out. At one point, my uncle's on the couch relaxing, watching the football game. He's in that state where you're just absent-mindedly watching TV and casually paying attention to the environment. Out of nowhere, this figure of a young man in blue jeans passes in front of my uncle, between him and the TV, and turns right into the hallway which leads to their bedrooms. My uncle doesn't think much of it, other than, oh, someone else is here. He chalks it up to someone that was invited, and not long after something breaks him from his state, probably a commercial or something. He turns to the friend's wife and says, "Hey, who's over here?" "What?" she said. "The guy that just passed in front of me in blue jeans." She replied, "What are you talking about?" "I saw him just a moment ago. He passed right in front of me and turned down the hallway into the bedrooms." His wife gets this weird look on her face, then calls loudly for her husband. The husband comes either from the upstairs or inside the front door. "What are you yelling about? Something wrong?" "Tell him." My uncle relays what he saw to his friend, and his friend goes, "What are you talking about? There's no one else here." The wife gives him this look like she wants him to say something, and he's looking back like, "What?" "Well, tell him already. He doesn't need to know about that." "Was he a young guy?" the wife asks my uncle. "Yeah, he looked young. Had a t-shirt on, I guess a plain shirt with no writing or anything." It's at this point that my uncle realizes that the person wasn't completely solid. He wasn't exactly transparent, he wasn't a shadow, but it's hard to explain. He was a figure that resembled a young man. So his friend, now looking a bit freaked out, tells him that a young man used to rent this house way before them somewhere around the 50s, and for one reason or another shot himself in the head. The bullet even ended up lodged in the roof of the home. Even more eerily, the man had shot himself in the back bedroom, the same area my uncle saw him walking towards. I actually have a lot of ghost experiences, but for now I'll talk about the year I lived in a haunted house. I was 12, and my family had just moved us to a place called Kennewick, Washington. We were renting a one-story house from an older couple. My cousins, who I was super close with, helped us move in and stayed the night with us our first couple of nights. Weird stuff started happening the very first night. For one, the guest room had a really weird vibe that nobody cared for, so they decided to sleep in the living room. I recall hearing knocking in the walls disturbing me from sleeping well. We all asked each other who was doing it in the morning, parents included, but none of us took responsibility. Another thing that would happen, every night that I was sleeping, my closet doors would open. No matter which house I've lived in, I've needed the closet closed to sleep. I got so scared waking up to see my closet doors completely open that I once tied a chain around the handles to keep the doors closed. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of the chain hitting the ground. I watched my closet doors open completely, right before my eyes. I was so frozen in fear, I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. I somehow fell back asleep that way. After that, I accepted that those doors would remain open. Also, every morning that I woke up for school and walked down the hallway, it would feel like someone rushed out of the guest room to follow me down the hall right on my heels. I would sit down on a chair in the living room and feel whatever it was go past me into our kitchen. I eventually got used to it, as weird as it sounds. When you live in a haunted house, you have no choice but to get used to what is happening to you. One night I had a girlfriend sleepover. We had a great time eating pizza and staying up late watching movies. It was about 2 a.m. when we finally turned off all the lights and settled down on the floor in the living room. The curtains to the sliding glass door we were next to were open, and it was a bright moon that night, so we could easily see into my backyard and the details of it without issue. Just as it got quiet, I randomly said out loud, "Oh, by the way, this house is haunted." She says, "What?" Then 3 incredibly loud knocks hit the back window. We both looked outside and there was absolutely nothing, no wind at all. She burst into tears, and I had to calm her down by letting her know that nothing else would probably happen that night. If I can live there and be okay, she will be just fine. I'm honestly surprised she didn't demand to be taken home. I always enjoyed the ghost's timing on that one. Some other things happened in that house, like stuff getting knocked off of shelves, feeling genuinely uncomfortable to be there alone even during the day. We lived there less than 2 years, and I'm glad. I've remarried now, but this happened on my honeymoon with my first wife. We went to Charleston, South Carolina. It was a great decision. The old wrought iron fences and cobblestone streets were so historic and interesting. So, me being a fan of ghost stories, decided we'd do a ghost walk one night. As we are doing the ghost walk, they're telling us interesting stories, showing us spooky locations, and we are having a great time. We're even kind of laughing at details like, "Oh yeah, I bet they saw something," and just being giggly newlyweds. We get to this part in the tour where there's this story about a struggle in an alleyway where one man killed another one with a knife over some owed money or something of that nature. After the story, they add that every once in a while, there have been sightings or noises in the alleyway by people in their tour groups. They'll feel a burning sensation on their leg and will find a cut there, as if someone sliced them with a knife. We looked at each other like, yeah, sure, they probably had one too many drinks. It's spooky tales, but I don't actually believe in ghosts and don't take it seriously. So, we're going along further into the tour when I feel an itching sensation on my leg. I figured a mosquito got me because I'm a damn magnet for those horrible things, so I scratch it. It didn't feel good after I scratched it. I actually got more of a burning sensation, almost like the feeling they described people in tour groups got. No, I'm not psyching myself out, I said inwardly. I know the mind can play tricks on you, and I wasn't going to fall for that. So I ignored the feeling. Maybe just a muscle cramp from walking around all day, who knows? We finish up the tour and I'm ignoring it, but it's in the back of my mind. We get back to the hotel. I decide to at least look at my leg because maybe I scraped it on something and didn't realize it. I look down and there's a red mark on my leg in a straight line. It didn't exactly resemble a cut, almost like something rough maybe scraped up against my leg. It's not bleeding, but the skin is very irritated. I'm a bit freaked out, but I brush it off. The next morning, the mark is barely visible. My story takes place in 2018. Picture it, New Orleans during Halloween or Creux de Boue season. My parents and I were there to celebrate a birthday, my father's, and attend a healthcare conference to present research, me. We decided to stay at the Hotel Monteleone, located in the French Quarter, because that is where my conference was taking place. Little did I know, it's also known for being haunted. As a psychic medium, I was fully prepared to have many paranormal experiences, but I was not prepared for what happened to both my parents soon after we arrived. On the first night of our arrival, my parents had to stay in my room because their room was double booked. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to find my father sitting up in his bed across from mine. There was a thin androgynous, 8 foot tall, being touching his leg. I watched for a few minutes. My dad laid back down, and the benevolent being disappeared. The next day, I asked my dad about it. He said he was visited by an alien being who told him he was healing his sciatica pain. Indeed, his pain disappeared for months and months. 4 days later, My parents are now staying in their room. On the last morning of our stay, my father rings me to please come to their room. I get there and see that they are both anxious and bewildered. My father then proceeds to tell me that he knows my mother was possessed by a spirit the night before, who kept insisting that she jump from the window in her room. My dad stated that around 3 a.m., the night before, my mother woke him up to tell him to hold her hands and to not let her go. My father thought my mother was having a stroke because her face looked faded somehow. She was there but not, he said. His intuition told him to keep guard. My mother recounted that she felt when a young woman entered her body, but pushed past her to ask my father to hold her hands until the morning came. She said the woman kept asking her to go to the window and jump. My mother said all she could do was pray for protection. She said she focused on my dad and asked Spirit to leave her. We left New Orleans a little shaken, but okay. When I got back home, I reached out to the hotel, spoke to a manager about the incident. He informed me that he had worked there 5 years, and I was the third person he spoke to who had this experience. He validated that there was a story that a young woman had jumped to her death from that room after being jilted by a lover. I sure do wish they had disclosed that information prior to me booking that room. Now I know better, I ask before I book. Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.